You are very organized, and in your view, how does staying organized as a project manager, how can that help you to build trust with your stakeholders internally, externally? What are your thoughts on that?
If you are not a well-organized project manager, you're not going to inspire confidence in the people working for you or with you. Stakeholders need to know that you're consistent. So does your team. You need to have consistent updates, structured meetings, clear documentation. It all communicates that not just are you competent in what you do.
Welcome to another episode of the AEC Project Management Podcast, where we explore the leadership strategies and real-world challenges of managing projects in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. I'm your host, Anthony Fasano, and today's episode marks a special milestone. We're introducing a new voice to the show, someone who will play a big role in its future. Joining us for the very first time as co-host is Fiona Johann, PMP, AEC PM, Strategic Initiatives Team Lead at the Engineering Management Institute. Fiona brings a unique blend of creativity and structure to project management. She started her journey in stage management before moving into our high-impact strategic AEC industry. In this episode, we're going to get to know Fiona, and we're going to dive into two of the most underrated skills in project management: organization and understanding people. Fiona is very good at both, and today she's going to share some tips for how you can improve in these two areas that will make you a much better project manager. Let's jump right in. All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest, who's also going to be our new co-host to the podcast. Fiona Johann is a PMP, AEC PM, and she is our Strategic Initiatives Team Lead at the Engineering Management Institute. And Fiona, welcome to the AEC Project Management Podcast.
Thank you.
So Fiona, maybe you could start off by telling our listeners a little bit about your background and how your experience in stage management eventually led you into project management in your current role at EMI.
Yeah. So most people don't hear theater and think project management, but I went to Penn State University to get my BFA in stage management. And I think our advisor quickly noticed over the years that not everybody stays in theater, right? And so he was ahead of the game in looking for ways that he could make sure that we weren't just stuck in stage management. So he introduced a lot of PMBOK principles into our curriculum and structure. I know that the one day when he brought out that project management triangle, he referred to it as good, fast, cheap. And we were talking about how in theater, we're often working with good and cheap, and that doesn't always equal fast. So when I learned that principle, my brain locked right in, right? I was like, that's it. I can apply this to every principle in my life. So I got my stage management degree. I quickly realized that the nights and weekend and jumping contract to contract life was not going to be for me. I'm more of a find a stable career somewhere and stick with it. So I ended up working at Duke. I got an entry-level job there at Duke University in the School of Medicine, working as an events coordinator for the Leadership and Development Group, so the Office for Faculty in the School of Medicine. So we worked on leadership development for our medical faculty. And so that was a great place for me to take that event planning, stage management background and grow in the leadership development space. And while I was there, I also got my PMP certification, because a lot of things I was doing were just very much related to running any kind of project. We ran a lot of initiatives. We did leadership programs, but we also, anytime there was any kind of way to support faculty through their academic process, that was something that we took on. So lots of projects, lots of initiatives. So that all led me to EMI, where I'm now the Strategic Initiatives Team Lead, as you mentioned. And it's cool because I get to bring together the project management, the adult learning, the event planning, and the strategy all in one place, which has been an exciting next step.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Fiona is kind of coordinating and planning our AEC PM Connect events with her team, amongst other things, like overseeing our AEC PM toolkit and our internal leadership program. So lots of stuff that really mesh really well with the things that we do. And it's exciting to have her on board, not just at EMI, but also to co-host this podcast, because she has a lot of project management knowledge. And I mean, in terms of like tasks, if you think about the tasks that go into like event planning or stage management, there's a tremendous amount of tasks, which is why the project management framework works so well and lines up perfectly with that kind of work. So, Fiona, as the new co host of this podcast, what are you looking forward to the most? And how do you plan to kind of bring clarity, structure, and engaging conversations to the listeners here?
Yeah, so I think as a former theater kid, it'll come as no surprise that I love a good story. I love background. So I'm hoping that through this podcast, I'll get to hear stories from like behind the professional, like what brought them to where they are, what are their backgrounds and their experiences, and what kind of insights did that bring forward for them that they can share today. I think there's a lot of value, not just in understanding where people or what they know, but how they know it and how they came to know it. I feel like that story and process really integrates those learnings. As a co-host, I'm really hoping that I can create a space where we can let those stories naturally unfold, but also take away clear, actionable ideas and steps for listeners to then integrate into their own project management day to day. Hopefully, we can leave inspired and ready to grow some more, all on our project management journeys.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that that is a big piece of project management. Like you said, it's not just the project manager, it's like what their story is, because every project manager brings something different to the table, right? Yeah, we all operate within the 5 process groups of project management. We get that, but we're all different. So I think in this show, we try to kind of unpack that a little bit with each person. And, that can really help people see what tendencies and habits can make project managers, I guess, help project managers make it through some of the projects that we have to deal with.
For
So,
sure.
Fiona, I mean, you've worked on some pretty complex projects in your career. You're working on some now at EMI. I mean, our AEC Connect event in Kansas this year, we have 30 speakers alone. So that's highly complex. We have our toolkit project where you've overseen the design and implementation of like 50 plus forms for our clients in terms of templates and tools. What systems or habits have you found to be most effective in keeping complex projects kind of organized and moving forward?
Right. So as you said, we got lots of different things going on, and I think it comes down to, for me, the people you're working with and what they're used to working with. So I'm not whatever system I'm using, I'm happy to integrate into whatever, morph into whatever mode we need, but whatever system we're using, it needs to allow for frequent check-ins, flexibility, and a shared understanding across the entire team. So, sometimes it's a spreadsheet, sometimes it's a task management system, but whatever it is, we need to make sure that the entire team knows how we're using it for each situation. In my team alone, we currently, as you mentioned, working the toolkit and we have these speakers, and there's some things I can't ask a task management system to keep track of, like the personal touch that is required when you're dealing with people. So, sometimes it's a little more email heavy, but you do need to integrate and build systems that work for your entire team and be very clear on how we're working them. I think every group has a different rhythm and a different communication style and different comfort levels with tools. And you need to take those into account and decide when's the time to push for a new tool that you think could be really helpful, and when's the time to lean back on some of the processes that are old and true and work for this group. I will say that keeping a project on task, I think, or on track, one of the most important things is knowing all the people that are behind it and how do they collaborate best, what keeps them motivated. You need to know when can you push them a little harder and how can you push them, and when you need to step back and ask some questions or raise concerns. So I think in every tool we use, we are at the end of the day dealing with people. So we need to understand those people, how the tools work with them. I look at my role a lot as how am I coordinating and translating all these moving pieces so that my team can move forward effectively. And I'm always looking for where are the gaps in the communications? Are the expectations clearly lined out? How can I use this different tool to help me clarify what the expectations are? Even I think coming back to the tool piece, what if I'm using a tool, what are the expectations I laid out? Like if I assign this task to you in a task management system, do I always expect you to do it the day I've assigned it? Do I expect you to come back to me if you can't make it done at the right time? It's just a lot of communication no matter what you're using. I think if we're building systems around the teams we have, we're going to be successful in no matter what we do.
Yeah, and I think basically what I'm hearing so far through the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes here, which I like a lot, is your emphasis on the importance of people
Always.
in project management, right? Like you said, what stories can we uncover through the podcast? You mentioned just now understanding the different people on your team, and maybe someone could get pushed a little bit more, or someone needs more information, or, whatever their kind of work style and their background is. And I think that is, again, something that gets lost when we just focus on the 5 process groups, right? And we think very, analytically around it, which is part of project management, but it's probably only half of it, and maybe not the most important half, quite frankly, when you start to deal with a lot of stakeholders on your projects. And so you are very organized. And in your view, how does staying organized as a project manager, how can that help you to build trust with your stakeholders internally, externally? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that if you are not a well-organized project manager, you you're not going to inspire confidence in the people working for you or with you. Stakeholders need to know that you're consistent. So does your team. You need to have consistent updates, structured meetings, clear documentation. It all communicates that not just are you competent in what you do, but you care about it because you're being really clear and deliberate in what you're doing. And there's no way you can do any of those things without being an organized human, or at least it's much easier and becomes more of an efficient system. And I think the thing that in project management that can be so tricky and important with organization is that we are, again, dealing with people. Things are going to change. People are the unknown variable. I don't know day to day what's going to happen with X, Y, or Z. But if my systems are in place and my organization is in place, I can fall back to it and see how we can deal with this unknown variable that is people. And so, the task, the information, those are the easy things to organize. So organize all the things you can, because every interaction you have with everybody in the world is just like a little micro message in your, it's your little, I always think of trust as like a bank, right? I'm making these like micro deposits into the bank of trust all the time. So especially when I'm working with a stakeholder, if we have had smooth sailing or we're doing well and we do hit a hiccup, they're going to know that in general, over 80% of this project's efforts, Fiona has been on top of it. She has let me know when something is wrong. So their first assumption isn't panic, right? Because in the past, we've proven we're organized, we're efficient, we find problems before they come big problems. So we can have a conversation that isn't a critical one yet. And that's all thanks to organizational systems and tools, because all of that broadcast dependability and organization, that's what we need to be as project managers. And an organization lets us broadcast that dependability to everybody we're working with.
Yeah, and I guess to take it one step further, can you give us an example maybe of how organization on a project helped you to either, reduce a risk or avoid a scope or schedule delay, or anything you could share with us around kind of a real example?
Yeah, so one of my big ones I think about frequently, and it's been a few years now, but I was I was working in a medical institution during the COVID pandemic. And so things went a little crazy. Things were very uncertain. I was running leadership development programs, which when everyone was thinking pandemic, that was not on the first, that was not like oh, we must have this during a pandemic. When things are uncertain, nobody knew what was going to happen with funding. So the initial reaction from leadership, which I think was a good one, was like, let's see, where's the fat so we can preemptively be ready if there are cuts, right? So we, in our office, were really organized and detailed and meticulous. In a research institution, it shouldn't be a shocker to anybody that we liked data, right? So we had, and we collected the data we could. So we had data on every session we had led, who attended it, feedback, how the speakers did, you know, progress reports and goals, and all that information let us look at it and decide okay, so we have these leadership programs, but right now our faculty needs support during a crisis, right? So how do we support them as people, which was our main goal, is people supporting people. How do we support them as people during this crisis? So we were able to take all that information, and this was thanks to some amazing leadership and again, the organization. And we were able to not just cut scope, but we refocused it. So we scaled back in some areas, but then we went ahead and doubled down in others that we knew were going to be important. We prioritized support to our frontline medical staff. And then we were able to put systems in place that helped us pivot instead of reacting in a panic. So all that organization let us pause and say, what can we do differently instead of panicking and just slashing and cutting things? So in that, it was a pretty stressful time. In that, it let us manage our scope under extreme constraints. But we weren't doing less necessarily, but we were doing the right things with the resources we had at the time. And again, that was all thanks to meticulous tracking for years to find, we started supporting faculty with they were just having like group coaching sessions. And that was a cool thing that we were able to pull out because we had had something similar years ago, and we could go back and pull that information and see what went well and what didn't. So again, the refocusing the scope was essential in that time.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that organization, and having that data from all the tracking is so key when it comes to decision making. And the example you gave, of course, is probably one of the most stressful examples, right? Being in the medical field during COVID, which is
It was a
just,
little stressful. It wasn't
yeah,
even, I'm not
yeah,
a medical provider, but man.
right. Yeah, I would imagine. So one of the topics that we, of course, talk about a lot on this podcast as a project management podcast is communication. We know how critical communication is throughout projects. And I know on your team, because we work together, that you have multiple team members in different time zones, different cultures. And I would imagine even for some of our listeners, even if they have a local team, there's probably some kind of a hybrid or remote schedule where people could still be working at different times of the day. So I'm wondering what systems or processes that you use to try to maintain clear communication, in alignment with your team when there are people that are working at different times of the day, different locations, et cetera.
Yeah, so for me, I think when I came into EMI, I was given a team that we're all in different time zones. And so I made it a priority. We have daily huddles, so we meet 15 minutes every day to talk about what we're doing, what we're going to do tomorrow. And during that time, I made it a priority to ask them questions like, what is your when do you get your most thought work done? When is the time of day where you just need some like busy tasks? And then I also translated that to what time of day is that for me and how do I support them in that? So I know I have someone who's on the opposite side of the world as me. And I know that she likes to get things done early in the morning. It's very early in the morning for me. But so what I do is when I log in the morning, I prioritize her tasks because I know that helps her get her thought work done. I also have someone else who's just like a few hours different than me. And we just clarified and asked a lot of questions, what does your day look like? When's the best time for us to meet? And clearly, like there are times where you just have to say, hey, we have to meet at this time. We have to get this done. Is that doable? But I find that 90% of the time, if through conversations and knowing people's preferences, I can find times that work for people to be their best selves. And like maybe I try to avoid afternoon meetings for this team because I know that most of them are functioning at a higher rate in the morning, have that be their evening or my morning. So again, it's just a lot of asking questions and listening and understanding people. And the cultural piece comes in there as well. And you have to understand other cultures, like how am I going to get an answer that is like, do you feel comfortable telling your boss like, hey, these are my best, most productive hours? Or do you feel the need to say, no, I can work whenever? So you have to know those pieces as well. I guess there's just it's a lot of talking and getting to know and listening and trial and error. I feel like that as well comes in.
Yeah, and I think really what you've described here is a very people-focused approach to leadership and project management, right?
Always.
Understanding that every person on your team is different, like we talked about earlier, in terms of work styles, communication styles, locations, right? Time. Even if they are at different time zone, they still may work better their nighttime than their morning time, right? So again, like you said, you're not going to know those things until you work with someone, get a feel for them, and also ask them and have conversations with them about those things. And I think that's a great way to also build up the trust and relationships because people are appreciative of you being sensitive to their work styles, their work schedule, and working with them. And I think what Fiona talked about too, that I think is really important as a project manager is setting your team members up for success. So if that means there's one person that you have to start, when you start your day, you assign them stuff, and then the other person, maybe you wait a half an hour and meet them or whatever the case may be, just figuring out what it's going to take to get them to be successful And the tricky part about that is we can get sucked into our own things
Oh, for sure.
fast,
That's a hard
right?
thing to manage.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like, I guess it's having like the discipline, right, to understand that I need to set them up before I dive in, and then I get lost and go into a black hole somewhere, and then we're all kind of not productive to some degree.
Absolutely. I'm always trying to set up them for success, and then I know, and it's not that different from like event planning, right? Is like, and this is where I came back in theater, like I need to set up everything so that when I need to go check out to do my thought work. So in a theater, like you wouldn't think someone does that, but as a stage manager, you show up an hour early, you set up all the props, you set up the background, like project management isn't that different. You set up all these things so when everybody else comes in, they can start working on their things and be their most productive selves. When I need to sit down and like review the script for the show, make sure that we have all our cue cards ready. Project management to me doesn't feel that different in that like I start my day by setting everyone else up, and then I make sure that I have an hour where I can dive into my work. And then when I come out of that hour, what can I dole out to my team again, right? So it's just like a constant cycle of how can I set up my team? What do I need to focus on? What tasks come out of that my team can move this forward with? And it's just a constant balance.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to go back to organization for a minute, and I
Yeah,
want to also pair it up with thinking strategically. I think as a project manager, we need to think about the big picture. We need to think high level. We need to look at the project in the future and see what we think might go wrong or what might work well. And I'm curious as to how being very organized can help you or free you up to provide some time for that strategic thinking that we need to do.
absolutely. I'm a huge believer that if I have organized all the things, and when you start an organizational system, it does take longer to maintain, right? You've got to figure out what works, what doesn't work. But once you're into a system and you've documented your process and you've created your templates and you've established your communication flows, once those systems really start to take root, they start to sustain themselves with minimal maintenance, right? And like I think a great analogy is I'm a huge gardener. The beginning of the gardening season, you're out there, you're pulling all the weeds from last year you didn't take care of. You're making some rows, you're setting your watering system if you have one, you're planting your seeds. And then from there on out, if you've set yourself up, you're out there harvesting. You're not out there, watering the plants every day. No, you set up a system for that. You put it on a timer. It's good to go now. You check on it every so often to make sure the water's running, but you don't need to check in on it daily. You don't need to weed the plants because you put down a barrier, right? Like, so I feel like organizational systems in any way, any facet of life are the same. If I set up these systems to work for me instead of against me and take the time up front, like it's always going to take more time than you want it to when you first start the system because you're going to do something and be like, nah, that's not quite it. But if you keep dialing it and tuning it, then eventually you're going to have more time than you know what to do with because you've set your systems up to work for you. And now you can sit down and be like, all right, well, now I have an hour because I'm no longer tracking this every day. Instead of going in and tracking this report, I created a form that I go enter and put my log, enter my, let's call it a change log. I enter my new changes in. Once a day, I can go look at the entire log, make sure none of it's like red flagging to me. But instead of opening this document, reformatting, doing all these things, I've created a form that lets me track it all. I can do it in the moment, and then I can look back at it later and not let it be a huge time suck. And so that lets me shift back out of those problems faster. I guess my brain always think about it as like shifting gears, right? Like I have to shift in and out of thought work, right? Task oriented time versus I need to sit down and just let my brain simmer on this idea. And we just need to create systems that allow us to have time to simmer.
Yeah. I think automation and organization can be very helpful on your projects and in your project management efforts to allow you those kind of blocks of time where you could get away and just focus and think about things. And, it's funny because this applies at work and at home. I know I have this argument with my wife all the time, which is like, if we're going to pay a landscaper to install new plantings and trees, we better be going out there every night and watering. And I'm like, that's not going to happen. 3 kids, jobs, like, so we either have to have a hose with a timer or a sprinkler or something that's going to handle that,
Yep.
or else like you can't say we've got to water every night, because I could tell you before you even think that it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. We just planted 6 trees and I was like, I will not plant these trees until there's a watering system we've purchased right next to it to install when we plant them. Because I
Right.
know that once we plant them and walk away, it's over. They're dead.
That's right. So automation is good in project management and in real life as
Absolutely.
well.
It's the only way. We've got too many competing priorities.
Now, if we had some kind of robot to make lunches for kids,
That would be ideal.
that
Sign
would
me
be
up.
ideal. But we're not there yet. So let's talk about certifications for a minute here. You have your PMP, you have our AEC PM from EMI. Let's talk a little bit about how those credentials have maybe helped or influenced your approach in terms of project management, leading teams, staying organized. I think people are always wondering if it makes sense for them to go out and get a credential when it comes to project management. Just wanted to get your experience.
Absolutely. So I got my PMP, and that taught me I was working in those roles, but I had never had formal, to get your PMP, you got to do all the training courses. And to do that, through those, I was like, oh, there's terms for these, which gave me a shared language, which I think is really important when it comes to communication and working with other teams. But the other thing it did is it taught me the rules, right? Like, if I know the rules that fit to most projects, just like if I know the rules for driving on a road, I know when and how I can bend them to match what I need in the moment, right? So if I know that there's a project life cycle, then I can make updates and changes better because I know where in the cycle that's going to need to happen, right? So I can't, if you're like a new project manager and someone's like, oh, here's an idea, and you don't automatically flag it as scope creep, then later when you're monitoring, controlling, you're like, now hold on a second. Like, this isn't what we originally agreed to. But if instead, when I'm initiating a project and someone starts talking about scope and I'm like, well, this isn't really matching, we can monitor and check sooner and avoid problems. So the certification gave me that kind of roadmap. And then the AECPM was just, like, here's your project management in the AEC world, which is somewhat newer to me. So that's, that was really helpful to see, like, what are project managers in this field needing more of in order to get projects done. But I think what all of these, I'm a huge fan. I'm German heritage. We like rules. I want to know, like, what is the expectation? What is the rule? And why is it that way? Because then I know in the moment when I'm managing a project, where I can bend and shift. Because again, like I said before, we have all these tasks and things to do, but at the end of the day, we're dealing with people, and people are creative and complex, and they do not always follow the patterns. And those certifications that value structure are a great springboard, but and give you a sense, like I said, of all the moving pieces, but we still have to be able to be flexible and empathetic and creative with people. So it's managing, like, the two things together, I feel like, are what really make a project management, like, professional successful. Is like, here's the framework, here's how I do it, and here are the people that I need to figure out how to get through this system.
Yeah, no, and I probably should have said this before the question, just for those of you that may not be familiar with these certifications. The PMP, the Project Management Professional, is a certification issued by the Project Management Institute, or PMI,
Yeah.
globally. And it is really, what's great about it is that it is a very global standard for project management language, vocabulary, the 5 process groups. So that's a big benefit. I think the one thing that is a little bit of a downside about the PMP is that it is generic, right? So if you are an engineer, if you are an architect, if you're working on engineering or architecture or construction projects, like, the PMP is something that will be used by someone in finance, someone in accounting, et cetera. And what's nice about the AECPM that we give out at EMI is that it is focused on the industry. I would say probably the one downside to ours is it isn't probably globally recognized yet, like PMP, because it's a relatively newer certification, but it certainly has a really good recognition within the industry that we'll continue to build. But I think, just generally speaking, like Fiona said, when you have a certification, either one of them, it does give you some structure to your learning and your process when it comes to project management, which is really helpful. And, I think it gives you some recognition as to your knowledge, around project management, which I think is very important. I mean, Fiona gave her background with the stage management, event planning. If you met Fiona and she didn't have a PMP, you might not think of project management when it comes to these things. But like we talked about, they're probably the prototypical examples of project management because the number of tasks and the different phases that you have to do with events, stage management. So, there's lots of benefits to them, and, hopefully you'll consider one of them for yourself, either one or both, because they can be very, very beneficial. All right, Fiona, it's time for our final question here. We call it the PM pitfalls question. What
No
would you
pressure.
say? No pressure. What would you say is one of the bigger pitfalls that you've maybe seen project managers deal with? And how would you recommend either overcoming it, avoiding it, minimize it for those PMs out there?
Absolutely. So I think it will come as no surprise that I think the biggest pitfall that I've seen project managers and managers in general is failing to truly get to know the people they're working with. It's easy to focus on tasks and timelines, but if you understand your teams as individuals and how they work and what motivates them and where they thrive, you miss out on building some trust and gaining some insight about them. So when you take time to build the real relationships, you're going to earn their trust, but not just their trust in you, but your trust in them, right? Like, I need to trust you as an individual. So I need to know that the person I'm working closest with knows, or who's working closest with a task knows that task deeply. And I need to be confident in their abilities to do that without me micromanaging them. Because nobody likes both sides of any situation. Hate, hate being micromanaged, hate micromanaging. So I think in order to understand their workflow and their communication styles and their habits, you need to know them. And then once you know them, you can step away from the control and act more as a support, right? I feel like leaders, what we should do is support people through what we've asked them to do. Ideally, they will grow and they will do better if we trust them and they trust us. And I feel like that is all through relationship building.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I really like the answer, because a lot of times the answer to this question will be something related to scoping or scheduling or budgeting. And
I
we
think
know that
all
those
those
are
things can be solved
right.
by
Yeah,
being in
right.
harmony with people.
Exactly. And I always say that the biggest misnomer about project management in general is that the term doesn't have the word people in it,
I would agree
right?
with that.
Which makes people feel like, okay, I just have to do a bunch of task managing and, very linear stuff. So again, I'm excited to welcome Fiona on as the co-host. I think you can see from her answers to the questions today, she's going to bring a very people-oriented focus to this project management podcast, which we both know is very, very important. And again, Fiona is a PMP. She has our AEC PM certification. She's our strategic initiatives team lead at EMI, and we're thrilled to have her as the new co-host of the AEC Project Management Podcast. So Fiona, thanks for joining me today, and thanks for agreeing to come on here and being our co-host. Some guests we'll interview together, some we might do individually, but either way, we will make sure to continue to try to bring as much value as we can to you as listeners, so that you could be the best PMs that you can be. So thanks so much, Fiona. I'm looking forward to working with you on the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, and I'm super excited to meet some people.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Fiona. She's going to bring a lot to the table as a co-host of this podcast, namely helping you understand the people side of project management, because it is just as important as your scope, schedule, and budget. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel here. We do put out episodes like this on a weekly basis to help technical professionals become better project managers. We'll see you next week.